Welcome back, Particle People. We are in Once Human, Once More with your host, Sand for Days. Today we're going to be discussing the Prismverse, what it is, how's the scenario, and what should we know. For those who don't know, Prismverse Clash is Once Human's first expansion, or new scenario I should say. This one is focused exclusively on PvP. There still are your standard PvE elements that you can use to level up, which you can do so at an accelerated pace in this scenario. However, I'm going to be entirely honest. If you were expecting something with the same level of depth as our first scenario, prepare to be wildly disappointed. Just so everyone is aware, this scenario takes place in the same part of the map with almost all of the same things going on, same bosses, same cities. There's just a few tweaks that occurred, so it's more of a PvP-oriented faction versus faction type scenario. So if you are currently in a late stage PvE scenario and you are just looking for more PvE content to sink your teeth into, there is nothing new on the PvE side inside of this scenario. I'd suggest sticking with your current scenario until the next expansion comes out. That'll be sometime in October. So what exactly is Prismverse Clash? You see, this scenario is based in a new reality where Rosetta is not totally irredeemable and the Mayflies aren't totally perfect. So you're allowed to pick to join either the Rosetta faction or the Mayfly faction and see if you can't bring balance to this world by, slaughtering the competition. If you choose to go with the Rosetta faction, which I'll be entirely honest, it seems almost everyone has, then you'll get special drones that can assist you with doing work or defending your base. If you decide to be a Mayfly, then you'll get genetic modifications, which allow you to do some very weird things, like calling lightning down on local foes. You ultimately gain points for your faction and towards winning the war by collecting these prism variants of deviations. Just so you are aware, these deviations look exactly the same as regular ones, except for have some better perks on occasion, with two notable exceptions. The first exception being Berserkosaurus Rex, which is a dripped out version of the Chefosaurus Rex and is ultimately just a better version. And the second exception is the Radiant one, which is a more powerful version of a deviation that people don't use and still probably won't use. The two exceptions are worth significantly more points as they're prism deviations, so if you capture one of these, your faction will have a significant boost in points. So now you might be asking, how do we get these prism deviations? And it's quite simple, just complete world events. These prism deviations drop from crisis events as long as they are inside of designated PvP zones, which is a very large majority of the map. If one of these deviations drops from one of the events, you have to go ahead and capture that deviation, but you're not done yet. You still have to get it back to a base inside of the active PvP zone, put it in storage for at least 30 minutes until you get the prism points. During this time, people will be able to see the prism energy on the map to find your base and try to take you down and steal the deviation. If you manage to contain the deviation for the amount of time that it tells you to do so, your faction will end up getting the points, and the person who captured the deviant will get to keep it. So before I hop into my experience with this Prismverse Clash, I want to go ahead and highlight a few issues that I have with this scenario. The first thing is the absolute sparsity of content. Let's look at the scenario Manibus that we just came from. This gives us a variety of bosses, a whole bunch of silos, and a bunch of cool things to go after. Then they introduced a hard mode of the server that came with shiny deviations. This was the base level of what we expected for a scenario, or at least what I expected for a scenario. When you get to Prismverse Clash, it's mostly the same exact thing, except for now you can work with Mary, and who doesn't want to do that? And it's heavily focused on PvP, but you can still do a lot of the previous scenarios jazz. So the one hook that they have is this big idea that you have to get these prism deviations, and unfortunately they're only there when the world events are, so that's like, what, once every 45 minutes or so? And then everybody has to flock there because they want to partake in the main thing that this scenario is for, so suddenly we run into our second issue, and that's that Once Human has notoriously weak servers. No matter where you are or what you're doing inside the game, if there's more than, let's say, 10 people on the screen at the same time, the game starts to experience latency like you would not believe. And that's enough of a pain in the ass when it's just PvE and you can potentially use an adrenaline shot to pick yourself back up. However, when it's PvP, they can finish you off while you're on the ground, so if you're lagging particularly worse than the next guy next to you, well, guess what? You're dead. Granted, you can find prism deviations in a couple other events that aren't exactly going to be direct conflict, however, they are notoriously rare, and even finding those marks you as it's going to put off prism energy. Meaning, one way or the other, if there is a prism in play, then you are going to experience delay. I felt like a really crappy lawyer defending a murderer there.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
And then finally, we have my last qualm with this particular scenario, which is they're like, hey, level up super quickly. Here's all this stuff so you can get levels and get to the main part and kill each other. So then you have an increased amount of people trying to gain levels super quickly because we're told to do so in all of these areas that are completely barren of enemies because every time one spawns, it's killed instantly. If you leave the safe zone, there's a good chance of being PvP'd, so at least for the earlier levels, you want to stay in the safe zone and just do some PvE farming. If you really want to ensure you have a constant stream of experience, experience. You can do silos, but it's not super fun to do a silo over and over just to get to the point where you can PvP properly. Overall, this scenario feels like a mod that was made by one person in just a few days. The quality and the quantity of content here is lacking. This release coincided with the most ridiculous loot box they have ever released. It is gougingly expensive with an incredible amount of things that you will never get to unlock unless you're absurdly lucky. Or you could be a whale and just purchase until you get exactly what you want. This is also at the same time when they're launching their beta version of the mobile platform for this game, so I'm not really surprised we're seeing mobile level greediness here. At least from the forums that I've been on, the community is currently pissed with all of these releases, but let's jump into my experience firsthand. Initially in this scenario, I'm talking to our best friend here, and she says I have to pick a faction, so I instantly decide after looking deep into Mary's eyes that this is the woman for me and I need to assist her. She seduced me with those bedroom eyes. How could I ever say no to such a little firecracker? Make sure that you subscribe if you simp for Mary too. After simping for Mary, I end up getting dropped into Blackfell, because here the world is divided differently, levels are scaling differently, so we can keep the two factions apart at the beginning of the game. Since Rosetta starts in Blackfell, I feel like it's almost an unfair advantage because the amount of loot that's densely packed in the main city here is insane. However, when I first touch down after being portaled into this world, I am met with level 40-something enemies, because they did not fix the scaling on the bus enemies apparently. After retreating and killing some goats for some meat as well as building some basic furniture, I decide to teleport in some of my resources so I can start building a real big boy base. I'm just kidding, this is a very small base, but then I decided I was going to follow the quest line to get some quick levels, and Grandpa Rosetta told me to go do some basic jazz out in the wilderness, so I did exactly that, heading to my first point of interest. The server did just open, so it was massively overpopulated, and finding absolutely any enemies to kill was a task and a half. It felt like a barren wasteland. After this point, we're going to jump a little bit into the future, because me finding my initial levels was very difficult as I scrounged together enough to put together my tasks to get the little bonus experience. Once I do get my first perk at level 5, I find out that Rosetta gets these drones, which are super duper cool. I decided to spec into the one that helps me harvest ore, because initially I thought that was going to be very helpful. I mean, it's cool and all, and I'm sure I can probably sell it to other people later, but it was really a mistake. Moving forward, I'm able to get into my first silo. After clearing that, I'm getting some serious levels. I get a few new perks, as well as discovering that you can get the Mayfly abilities even as Rosetta. They're just rarer. But here I'm just going to jump straight into the future, because not much happens that we haven't seen before. Other than building this super cool drone and having it follow me around as I was gathering some ore, there were mild amounts of random PvP that occurred, but it wasn't really meaningful as you don't get anything for just random PvP. This is until I found our faction taking out a crisis event where one of these players was able to capture a Prism Deviant and was looking for a place to put it. This led to me teaming up with them so they could use my base and put it in one of my things. They can keep the Deviant, I don't care, I just want the points. We set up camp inside my teeny tiny base. We're holding on for about 30 minutes as we have to do so. I put it inside of our faction chat that we have one, we're holding it down, and I drop off the coordinates. Within moments, I have Rosetta players all over the frickin' place and absolutely no one contesting us. This was 30 minutes of us sitting here with absolute lag because of the sheer amount of people who were helping us protect this Deviant with no Mayfly intervention. And that's how every single Prism Deviant capture has gone so far, with the exception of one. And unfortunately, I didn't get footage of this, but at one point I found a Mayfly trying to capture a Prism Deviation all by their lonesome, so I killed them. I did not have explosives to get through their base, so I put the coordinates up in the chat, and in moments we were absolutely swarmed. I got the help I asked for and more as the Rosetta players destroyed the base, leveling it down to nothing, past the point of insult, by the way, because we only needed to grab the Deviant. If you were a Mayfly player right now, I am so sorry for you, as it is an absolutely brutal experience. I'm sure on my main character, when I come around again, I'm sure I'm going to go Mayfly just to try to level these scales. I have been playing on and off trying to find an interesting PvP event, but every single one I've been to has just been a stomp. It's not fun at all to just be crushing a few players as a horde. Between the incredible lag, the lack of challenge, and the fact that these Mayfly characters are going to quit soon because it's not fun for them either, I think it's safe to say that Prismverse Clash has been incredibly disappointing so far, and I'm really hoping the developers step in here soon to fix it some way somehow. But in the meantime, I suppose I'll just play more Deadlock while I wait for something to do. That game is fire. Of course, I'm not going to rant about all of the things that I don't like about the scenario without trying to offer some kind of solution, and I do have a proposal for you, once human. Hear me out. First things first, allow people to switch factions if one is heavily outnumbered, and incentivize players to do exactly that. Maybe offer them like 500 star Grom to go to the opposing faction. Let's face it, nobody likes to win every single match in an absolute stomp based on your numbers alone, and nobody likes being crushed by a horde with no chance to win. We have to even the numbers or else PvP is going to get stale really quick. And secondly, instead of having these areas where Prism deviations just drop after a crisis event that any horde of players can be on, make it like a battleground system similar to what you did for the Prime Wars. Have a certain amount of people from each faction that can walk in before the event begins, and then make it so that people have time to build their little outposts and such, and have the Prism deviation be decided inside of that event alone. Do not let the entire server come down on it, that way people still have a chance to win. I think that's one of the reasons why like World of Warcraft battlegrounds are so fun, is because they even the playing scales as much as they possibly can without making it, unfun. But with all of that said, what do you think about Prismverse Clash? Have you gotten to play it yet, and are you as disappointed as I am? Feel free to let me know in the comments, but as always, this is San for Days. I'm Course, and I get everywhere. Bye bye now.